On the endless snow-covered mountains, a father and son stand atop a cliff. Having endured countless hardships, Ragnar has become king. Bjorn can't wait to plunder and go out to fight. Ragnar looked at Bjorn and asked him a question. Why are we at war? Ragnar told Bjorn that he has never yearned for power. He never thought about becoming a king. All he wanted was to provide the Vikings with a life of plenty. They live on this barren and frigid land with scarce farmland, long winters, and survival difficulties. So Ragnar planned to lead the Vikings to England after the ice and snow melted. Ecbert once promised to provide the Vikings with 5,000 acres of land. As for the power Bjorn mentioned, Ragnar told his son that as long as a person does enough for everyone, the so-called power and position would come naturally. The time to travel to England was approaching soon, and the migrating public were busy preparing. Before setting off, Lagertha entrusted her territory to Kalf's management. During these days when Lagertha was living alone, it was Kalf who accompanied her. However, Lagertha didn't expect that this decision would cause her to lose her own territory. Porun is pregnant, but also wants to go to England with Bjorn. Bjorn tried to dissuade her, but he failed. Considering that this trip to England was only for farming, not for fighting, he agreed to bring Porun along. Under the expectant gaze of their tribespeople, dozens of ships full of farmers and warriors majestically set off towards England. Everyone finally made it safely to Hvitserk, England. At the city gate, Ecbert and Quenthrith had been waiting there early. However, Ragnar noticed a serious problem. Hundreds of warriors he had previously left there were all absent. At the feast, Ragnar bluntly asked where all these warriors had gone.
Unfortunately, the forces of my uncle and younger brother have prevailed. But if you, Ragnar Lothbrok, and you, Lagertha, would join with us, I am sure of victory.
Just as the crowd was getting angry, Ecbert hypocritically stated that he had promised land to the Vikings, but because of the opposition of some of the nobles, it was now difficult for him to fulfill his promise. He wants the Vikings to help Quenthrith take back the throne of Mercia, so that he can answer to the nobles at home. Ecbert's real intention was to make Mercia a vassal state, paying him taxes. Ecbert's move was well thought out. He didn't send his own troops yet reaped all the benefits. For a long-term stable partnership, Ragnar had to agree to help Quenthrith reclaim the throne. After a discussion, Lagertha led the farmers to cultivate the assigned land. Athelstan, a person trusted by both sides, was left at Lagertha's side. The others followed Ragnar on the expedition, marching toward Mercia. Ecbert feared that the Vikings would claim Mercia as their own after defeating it, so he sent his son along with Ragnar. At this time, Quenthrith's uncle and brother, using intelligence, had already prepared for battle, assembling their forces to guard both sides of the river. When Ragnar's fleet reached the target location, they were suddenly attacked by a rain of arrows. Everyone immediately used their shields for defense. While everyone was unsure of what to do, Ragnar made a judgment. He noticed that there were fewer enemies on the right bank and that there were no bridges on the river, meaning it was difficult for the enemies on both sides to support each other. Ragnar immediately ordered a full assault on the right bank where the enemy was fewer. Brightwolf had no choice but to line up to fight, and the enemy on the left bank could not provide support due to the distance being too far.
I cannot help you. Raise shields! Draw! Loose! Spread your arrows! Spearmen!
On the other side, Burgred could only watch the war taking place across the river helplessly. Brightwolf and his army attempted to prevent the Vikings from landing, but they underestimated the strength of the Vikings. Ragnar led the Vikings to successfully land and began their frenzied killing of the enemy. Thorstein was severely wounded in the battle. Brightwolf's forces were quickly defeated. Floki dragged Brightwolf off his horse, ending his life. Facing her dead uncle, Quenthrith was not satisfied. She asked Ragnar to decapitate her uncle. Ragnar asked Quenthrith why she hated her uncle so much. Quenthrith spoke out about her own tragic experience, being abused by her uncle for as long as she could remember, even allowing her to be humiliated by other men, and not being able to stop them, even though she kept begging. After hearing these words, Ragnar instructed Floki to decapitate Brightwolf. Quenthrith took the head and vented all her hatred on her uncle's head. Their next target was Burgred on the other shore. Looking at the approaching warship, Burgred immediately prepared to fight. However, when his subordinates saw the scene on the ships, they were stunned. Each ship was decorated with the skulls of Mercia soldiers, causing a majority of the soldiers to turn and run.
Lead boat.
Princess Quenthrith shouted her brother's name, hoping he wouldn't flee, and assuring him that she wouldn't harm him. However, he ultimately chose to flee to save his life, following the advice of his deputy. Thus, even though Ragnar's army hadn't truly begun the fight, they had already achieved victory. Burgred's army didn't manage to evade the Vikings' pursuit, though, as Ragnar instructed them to continue their chase. Soon, Ethelwulf's soldiers captured a commander of Mercia. Under Ethelwulf's threat, he revealed Burgred's whereabouts and deployment. Thorstein's injuries grew more severe, but he didn't want to die just like that, so he asked Floki to amputate his arm.
I want you to cut off my arm.
Why not keep it?
Because it's killing me, stupid. It's no good to me anymore. I don't want it. In fact, I've always hated this arm. It has to go. I want Floki to do it. Will you do it, Floki? I suppose so. Get on with it.
After learning of Burgred's whereabouts, Ragnar ordered the entire army to march towards the target. Thorstein used himself to draw the opponent's attention, buying time for Ragnar's offense. His actions left the opposing soldiers somewhat perplexed, but they didn't let their guard down. With wave after wave of attack, Thorstein was seriously injured and could no longer wield his sword. Eventually, Thorstein died on the battlefield. Just as the soldiers were shocked, Ragnar led the Vikings to rush forth. They quickly engaged in intense warfare with Burgred's army. The Vikings' advantage in close combat was soon apparent, dealing a heavy blow to the enemy. In the ongoing fierce battles, Porin was knocked down by the enemy, and Bjorn immediately rushed over to save her. At this time, Porin had fainted. Bjorn looked around for help. Just then he saw Ragnar being stabbed by the enemy. When Ragnar stood atop a hill clutching his wound, he noticed that Burgred's main forces had yet to move. On spotting Ragnar alone, Burgred assumed he had victory in hand. However, he didn't anticipate that Ethelwulf's troops were occupying the high ground, prepared for an ambush. One by one, Burgred's soldiers fell, and he had no choice but to surrender. In this war, Ragnar was victorious. Watching their comrade Thorstein sacrifice himself in this battle, Floki began to question Ragnar's decisions. He asked Ragnar why they were risking their lives for these pagans and what was the meaning of their fight. Ragnar firmly replied that it was a choice made by all, and he too was saddened by the sacrifices of his brothers. Seeing the severely injured Porun, Bjorn was filled with pain and self-blame. Ragnar wanted to comfort his son, but when he found out that Porun was pregnant, he angrily reprimanded Bjorn. At this time, Quenthrith took her brother Burgred to find Ragnar. Burgred tried to explain to Ragnar that he was compelled and asked for his forgiveness, but Ragnar was very angry at this moment.
Ragnar. I forgive you.
Lagertha's unique personality caught Ecbert's attention. He decided to follow Lagertha to her fief. Seeing the fertile land, Lagertha was very satisfied. Ecbert warmly provided Lagertha with all the necessary tools and arranged a team of experts to guide her in farming. On this day, Ecbert planned to invite Lagertha back to the capital. After a few days of getting along, Lagertha agreed to follow him back to the castle. Once back at the castle, the relationship between the two became more nuanced. Ecbert began to court Lagertha and even presented her with a necklace of precious gems. Judith also seemed to have a crush on Athelstan. She even expressed her feelings to Athelstan after her meal, under the guise of penance. Ecbert invited Lagertha, Athelstan, and Judith to bathe together. However, as Lagertha and Ecbert became increasingly intimate, Judith felt very awkward. She nervously left the room. Athelstan found Judith and asked why she had suddenly left. Judith told Athelstan that she wanted to develop a relationship with him too. Meanwhile, Floki's wife brought in a strange man. A few days ago, 3 women had the same strange dream. In the dream, a man was walking in the snow, but his footsteps were completely silent. He held a burning snowball in one hand, and the other hand was full of blood, with drops of blood falling on the snow, causing smoke to rise. They didn't understand why they had the same dream. A few days later, a wanderer came to their territory. His right hand was still bleeding, corresponding to what they had seen in their dreams. So, Helga brought him to Aslaug. The 3 women were all curious about this stranger. The man said he was a wanderer named Harbard. He was very good at storytelling, whether it was about his adventures on his travels or the legends of the gods. He could tell them in great detail. Aslaug was captivated by Harbard's stories and decided to take him in. In the evening, Harbard recounted his experiences in colorful detail, and Aslaug was captivated by his stories. Just as everyone was captivated by Harbard's tales, Ivar's cries interrupted them. Harbard also followed into the house, where he seemed to quiet Ivar with just a few words. This made Aslaug even more curious about him. However, not long after, strange things happened in their territory. Some fishermen found the bodies of 2 children in areas far from the coastline. There were no external injuries on the bodies. It seemed they had drowned. But the fishermen couldn't comprehend how the children could have ended up so far from the shore. Siggy seemed to think of something and hurriedly left. Siggy sought the seer, hoping to get answers from him, but strangely this time, the gods gave no hint. Meanwhile, Siggy remembered her previous dream. She had dreamt of the seer being stabbed and unable to move or talk. Ivar seemed to have been affected by something and cried and made a fuss often, causing Aslaug great distress. Whenever Ivar cried, Aslaug would think of Harbard, hoping he could help calm him down. But Siggy thought it was dangerous, since they didn't know much about Harbard. At that moment, Harbard came into the room and easily put Ivar to sleep. Siggy, watching all this, couldn't help but voice the doubts in her heart.
Who are you?
You know who I am.
No, I don't. You have such power. Are you a god?
I wish. For who would not wish for such a thing?
In the days that followed, Aslaug took the initiative to get closer to Harbard. But Siggy harbored more suspicions. She was troubled about Harbard's true identity and began to feel uneasy. Siggy wished that Aslaug could realize her responsibilities as a queen and a mother, but Aslaug seemed to care less, leaving the children for Siggy to take care of while she left. Harbard took Ysraki to a dilapidated house, and then the two had an ambiguous relationship. Siggy was struggling to look after 3 children. In a moment of inattention, Ubi and Vitsirk slipped out.
I have to find them.
She hurriedly went out to find them, but saw the 2 children heading towards the ice. Her shouts were in vain. The children were as if drawn forward by a mysterious force. Siggy followed them, but as soon as she touched the ice, she heard a crack. Siggy ran over quickly, but the children were no longer visible. Without hesitation, she dived into the lake. In her frantic state, Siggy saw a familiar figure. It was her deceased daughter. Her heart was deeply moved, and immediately, she plunged underwater to save the other child. When Siggy rescued both children, she realized that the person on the ice was Harbard. At that moment, Siggy understood that perhaps this was a summons from her daughter. So, she chose to reunite with her family, letting her body sink to the bottom of the icy lake.